All right. So today we have Tate Welch. He's going to come up here and present his master's research looking at Gen Z perception of agricultural biotechnology. He's been a student here consistently for the entire time that I've been here. Last time I said this was my last student that's been here as long as I have, but I was wrong because I have one more that's been here exactly the same amount of time. So when you leave and Tess, the other one leaves, and I finally overtake you. I started my 7th year. All right, so take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Dillon. As he said, my name is Tate Welch. I'm originally from Pegram, Tennessee, but now I currently live here in Martin. And I've been working on this research project known as a Gen Z perception of agricultural biotechnology. So you look at this title and you think, well, what does that mean? There's several words that we probably need to break down. I'll give you a history of it, and then we can get into the research and the data that we collected from this question. So the first question is, what is agricultural biotechnology? Really, it's a very broad set of tools that people can use to alter living things. It's also known as agritech, and it's used to benefit and give certain living things advantages in order for survival and also advantages for us. The biggest factor that we're going to look into is GMOs. So that brings the next question of what are GMOs? Well, GMOs, it stands for genetically modified organisms, and it's the process of changing a living organism's genetic makeup in order for it to show certain traits that would be desirable for survival or for our own personal use. Today, GMOs are nearly in all the food that we buy at the supermarket. There was an article that's from the FDA that showed that just a little over 80% of our processed foods have some form of GMO ingredient in that food. GMOs have both advantages and disadvantages that create plenty of perspectives. There's the pro side that would look really at the advantages, and then there's the people that would be against the GMOs that look at the more disadvantages on the GMOs. So to give you a little history, the first GMO was introduced in 1982, and it was used for human insulin to treat diabetes. It has branched out way past that now. It has gotten into our food. And just an example of just maybe a little personal view that you can see of GMOs that I don't think is really focused on as much as, by definition, really your dogs are a GMO to an extent. A lot of it is, sure, there's some selective breeding, but there are certain breeds that have genetics with them that were altered in order to give that dog a certain trait that, of course, is to the human's desire, whether it's through training or through just a characteristic that the dog has that they like. GMOs have increased the size of fruits and vegetables. As you can see from this picture of an example, this, of course, is different varieties of corn, but you can see from the very beginning just the size of what corn was originally. Of course, that was just at maturity of like the actual size of corn that you can get off of a plant. It was very small. You could not feed a ton of people with it. The yield was pretty low. You had to go through a lot of plants just to actually get a good amount of corn. And as you go to the right of it, you can see just the growth of corn over the years. And you can see on the far right, that's closest to what it is today. And if you think about it from a farmer standpoint, this increases the yield of corn that they're able to harvest and give out. And from a consumer standpoint, you don't have to get as many corn cobs in order to feed yourself or feed your family or anything like that. So these changes come from a variety of just heirlooms. And then by taking those heirlooms, they took them into a GMO and genetically altered the heirlooms, and then they eventually were able to work up to this size of corn. Some advantages that come with GMOs. These crops can develop, some GMOs give them tolerance to herbicides whenever farmers are trying to fight weeds. Whenever you grow a plant, of course, the weeds, they grow around the plant, and then there's the risk of the weeds killing the plant. By giving crops that advantage, whenever the farmer put the herbicides to kill the weeds, there's a better survival rate for the corn that is trying to grow. Crops can be also resistant to diseases and insects. This is a absolute major killer of any kind of crop, and to give them that kind of protection can give farmers a good yield and don't have to deal with as much loss. Farmers can produce more and bigger fruits and vegetables. As seen from the slide before, you can see just the growth of corn and the amount of yield that come along with it. And it gives fruits and vegetables a longer shelf life. This helps supermarkets, it helps producers, and it also helps consumers too. With a retail store or supermarket can order these fruits and vegetables and they can come in, and rather than having to deal with anything just super seasonal, they have these fruits and vegetables that can last a longer time on the shelf, and these consumers can enjoy the fruits and vegetables basically year round, rather than having to wait for the season for that fruit or vegetable to come on the market. And of course, with retail stores having that kind of vegetable or fruit last that long on the shelf, they don't have to buy as much of that fruit or vegetable coming in, so it saves them money in that regards by just having fruits and vegetables there year round rather than having to buy more new fruits and vegetables. And then you have the other side, which are your disadvantages. A lot of people argue that it's harmful to your health in terms of it creates an antibiotic resistance. There's some GMOs they say doesn't have a good nutritional value, and there are allergic reactions that can come from GMOs. Now, I think this is also very dependent on what kind of product it is and what kind of GMO you're getting. I don't think this is something where every single GMO product can get this. Like, for example, with the second bullet, it says that there are some GMO products that have milk that can lead to cancer. I believe just looking at this broadly, you can see that I think it's from a lot of different kinds of GMOs that have these certain health issues rather than just a whole. There's other changes with the interaction between the plants and their environment. Of course, with GMOs, the certain advantages and resistance, there can be effects to the soils, there can be effects to the environment that's around them. And then some genetic changes can cause foods to be inherently unstable. There are some genetics that they've tested where some fruits and vegetables can take certain genetic changes better than other ones. So by just continuing to test with those GMOs, you can find certain advantages to where some can take it a lot better than others. So some people can see that this is an issue long-term for that fruit or vegetable. To get into the survey and the research, so our motivation was we wanted to get the Gen Z students' perspective on agricultural biotechnology and what drives those perspectives. So to break this down, there are several factors that drive those perspectives. Social media is a huge player today, especially in the Gen Z, like that age group. There are a lot of people that daily life is social media. You have all these different platforms such as Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, where there's so many different topics that pop up. It's hard for a young person to really understand what's truth and what's false. So being able to look at social media and just be careful on what is popping up, and that will really drive a perspective of whether you're for or against GMOs. Location is another big part of their perspective. Is there are some people that in rural areas, they've grown up around GMOs. There are people that they've built like that's their living. And then you've got people that live in more of an urban setting that may not have as much access to those GMO products rather than just going to the supermarket and buying the products that have those GMOs. So there's a lot more of a just hands-on perspective through the whole growth phase from a rural standpoint versus from an urban standpoint. Now, of course, there is definitely access for urban people to go out and see the whole process, but these are just general things that cause the perspective to be one way or the other based on location. Family beliefs, that's another big one. Young people, whenever they're growing, they, of course, are with their parents every day. They want to grow as a person, and the family members are really going to be a huge influence on what they believe and what they don't believe. So your parents, they may be for GMOs or they may be against GMOs, but when you're a young kid growing up around them and you hear what they say, then it's easy to believe the same thing as the parents. Schools are another big factor, and another people interaction is between the students. If you're not at home with your parents and hearing their side of the story, you're usually at school, and the students around you have their own perspectives and they're sharing it as well. And then even with schools, there's just not as much GMO stuff talked about. Just generally in all of the classes, there's usually just a small select classes, whether it's a science class or an agricultural class or a nutrition class that really touches on it just a little bit. But other than that, there's not much touching on GMOs, and those classes that I named, other than science, are usually just optional with other classes available. So not very many students are really exposed to it. Of course, human health, there may be people that have had health issues from GMOs in the past, and they may be trying to, of course, spread their perspective on it, and it can, bounce from one person to the other, and they can create another group. And of course, that kind of intertwines with social media too, with how they share it. Environmental risks is another factor, and of course, it is. There's people that see directly what it does to the environment with the soils and the air and just the area around it. And then there's some people that just hear it from other people and just see the environment that's around them in an urban setting, and they just hear about it, and then they create that perspective. So seeing those perspectives, let's see how the actual research unfolded. So what we did is we created a survey that included many GMO questions. It was just brought of, how do you feel about GMOs? How do you feel about it in the environment? How do you feel about it from a health perspective? And also, how much knowledge do you have of GMOs? The survey was we sent it out to as many colleges and universities as we possibly could. And over the several months that we did it, we had 406 students fill out the survey. And our questions were based from 1 to 10 on how they felt. Were they more for it? Were they more against it? Do they know as much about it? Do they not know? And these questions range, of course, across all kinds of knowledge about between background, environmental, and human health risk. So kind of another thing to understand is what is Gen Z students? When we send it to universities, the vast majority of their students are between that age of 18 and 43. So there's a high chance that when they send the survey out, the people that are filling out the survey are going to fall within that age group. Factors that they analyzed in the survey were, of course, between background and location and environmental risks. And we have to understand that technological advances are a part of everyday life for people in this age group, going back to social media where they see it every single day. And even with GMOs, it's a technological advancement, and we have to understand that it's just a part of everyday life, and it's going to continue to grow. So we have to be able to get the truth out there so they can really build a perspective that is around the truth. So the results of the survey, where we broke it down into female and male, and based on the female students, they had more of an issue with GMOs in their food products compared to a little more of the men. I've got a few charts up ahead that you'll be able to kind of see visually how these charts between male and female they differ. And there was also a noticeable lack of knowledge about GMOs through the maps that were put in here. There was a larger concern about GMO human health risk with people who lived in the suburbs, which I thought was a little more surprising. When you look at the map, there were people that weren't exactly in the cities, but were just outside of it. But I would think that the closer they were to the rural areas and the more exposure they get to that, you would think that they would be just all pro GMO. But from what it said on the map, that just wasn't the case with the people that were farther out from the cities. There was also a higher concern for environmental risks with people who live in urban areas. As mentioned before, these were people that the real exposure they got to GMOs were what they got in the supermarket. It wasn't as much of the hands-on experience that they get out in the field versus just what they were buying at the supermarket and seeing the label. Whenever they saw the label, that was what they built their perspective around.
So that's specific to environmental risks. There was a higher concern of environmental risks for people that live further from the.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
farm.
Yes, it's just because they weren't exposed to, it's just their environment was a lot different compared to people who were out in the field, and they were around a city environment. So just one of the charts, this is chart breaking down the females' answers in the survey, and you can see that there's a lot of red on the question that says they've got no concerns about GMO and food products. When we do this in comparison with the male graph, you can just see how far the red, which is closer to the score of 1, goes across that one question. Overall, you can see the rest of the questions regarding the health and regarding to environment and other factors. They were just the rest were pretty neutral and pretty level, but it was kind of surprising to see that just the concern in the food products and not as much from the environment or effects on my health or anything like that. And then when you compare it to the male chart, you see that the concerns for food products, it was definitely different. And just looking at it from top to bottom, it's a lot more neutral compared to how it was with the female ones. Organic farming was one that it seems they really seem to be closer to a 10 and started to be more positive towards. And in comparison to the rest, they seem pretty neutral. So if we look at it from a location standpoint, we have this graph of concern about GMO health risks. You can see a lot of the ones that are towards a 10 are more towards more populated areas. You have areas in Nashville and Seattle and some in the deep south in Texas where they seem to have a little more concern for the GMO health risks in areas that were more urban versus you see there's a more red and more yellow on the outskirts of the cities, and they have a lot more exposure to the GMOs out in the field. They have more of a livelihood versus the people that have grown up in the city.
Do you know where that runs in Texas?
I want to say, let me think.
It's like it.
It might be. Not too sure. I mean, it's probably north of Austin, north of Houston. I mean, I know there's a lot of big cities in Texas to where they could really build that kind of perspective.
This is saying that person has a really big concern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just the lone Texan.
Yeah. And then you see just on the outskirts of Washington and the outskirts of Tennessee, there's a little more less concern. And then I'm surprised that even the higher you go up into the Northeast, that there were spots in Ohio and especially New York and New Jersey that they even didn't have as much concern. And I would have thought they would have more concern for it.
We didn't get Martin though.
Yeah, we did not. So this graph shows the environmental risks and how they feel about towards environmental risks. And this goes back to where a lot of the people that were more concerned were also in the city limits and in the suburban areas. It reflects kind of like the last graph where a lot of those people that were on the outskirts, like Eastern Washington and into Mississippi and Georgia, and again, the states in the Northeast were also less concerned about environmental risk. And it's just, and again, that one in Texas continues to be really concerned. And then the last graph was just shows the lack of GMO knowledge. And this one stuck out to me that it really shows the little knowledge just nationwide of just GMOs, that whether it's school system or their household, it's just there's not as many people that know about GMOs as they probably should be. I mean, they're consuming GMO products and they really don't even know what they're putting in their body.
So which one is the lack knowledge, the bluer or the redder?
I want to say the lack would probably be the blue. I want to say.
They agree with not
Yeah.
knowing much.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that the city has good knowledge, but there's still, to me, there's still a good bit of blue. And then even the yellow, it seems like they're just kind of like they kind of know it, but they don't really know it well. So there's definitely some room for improvement in terms of educating them. And then the one in Texas, I noticed that there was a lot of concern, but at the same time, the knowledge is pretty low. So this is the lack of knowledge issue that I think needs to be covered. I have some ideas as to ways we can improve that. This is an article that I found that just regarding the Tennessee, that while half of the Tennesseans were knowledgeable about food labels in general, it says only 14% actually read the information that's on the labels. And over half knew nothing about this information at all. And GMOs are typically taught, as I said, in agriculture and nutrition classes, and I think it definitely needs to be expanded on. And I think one good way we can expand it is through just doing more farmers markets. You have both sides of the argument that show up for it. It's more of a communal thing. The farmer can come in, he can offer his products. He can tell them how he grew them. He can tell them where their GMOs used, and he can tell them why they were good for him. And then on the consumer side, they go to buy the product and they can express their opinion. And by working it out together, they can really understand GMOs and the good and the bad, and really build an accurate perspective of what GMOs are. As I mentioned, I think schools need to mention GMOs more in classes. I think that might be kind of difficult to do with some subjects, because I don't know how they would relate too well with math or social studies or any of those classes. But I think in those classes where they do offer them, they probably need to push them a little more. And the lack of knowledge, again, comes from social media, where someone can express their opinion and it can, blow up on social media, and people can get some inaccurate information about those GMOs and build a perspective around inaccurate information. So in summary, people in the urban areas have more of a concern for the human health and environmental risks, and lack of GMO knowledge is a big issue. And that would relate with the first bullet, that I think if people just knew more information and had more knowledge about the GMOs, they can create less of a concern, knowing how they can control their eating habits and just really better the GMO perspectives across the country. GMOs are in lots of foods, and I don't think that's going to change. I saw another article where it said today 92% of corn has GMOs, 94% of soybeans, and 94% of cotton contain GMOs. So it's definitely something that's not going to go away. It's technological advancement, and it's been here for decades now, and it'll continue to be experimented with. And for those people that are still against it, there are still non-GMO options in the grocery stores that they can just go that direction. If they feel like it. It's just depend on if their perspective is accurate. So benefits from this research, going back to the farmers market, I think consumers can better understand GMOs and create a better future for their perspectives. Of course, the information we gathered, of course, is not for every person in the country. It's from a pool of people that can express this issue, and I think it expresses that nationwide there's a lack of knowledge, and really is an issue across the country that needs to be brought up. People can create a more accurate perspective of GMOs by just realizing that, and by understanding the truth and being able to spread it, whether you're still for it or against it, just making sure they can defend why they believe that it's good or bad, and just be able to do it truthfully, then that's the best they can do. And like I said, schools need to include more information regarding GMOs to just better educate the country so that the perspective can be accurate. Okay, are there any questions regarding any of the information, the survey, the data, any of it?
That's a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I've got more than one, but I don't want to
Let's
like,
start with one.
I don't want to monopolize. Alright, so first, mine's a pretty basic question.
Okay.
And you may or may not have an answer for this, but so you showed the picture of the corn,
Yes.
the different varieties. So, you always see images of like, the first Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
you've seen pictures like the pilgrims, the Indians having like happy, good time sharing the meal. So, I mean, so with the corn, probably if you go back to say, I don't know, 1500s or 1600s, would it have looked a lot different than the corn that, right,
It
corn on
would,
the cob?
it would be a lot, it would definitely be smaller than what we have today.
Interesting. I have to say, I'm not that, so this is all new to me. So other aspects of those images might be accurate also. Okay. Okay, but so, yeah, that first part's very interesting.
Would you be able to go back to the Likert scale and explain kind of how that system works? That's something I'm less familiar with.
What, from the first ones or from the?
From the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, so with the red versus the green, which one's like more concerned, which one's less concerned?
So I think it also depends on the question. I think with, let's break down the first one. See, it says GMO technology is necessary to accommodate the growing population's demand for food. And then they would express their belief of one being not very necessary and green being necessary. I think it's, of course, just goes down the line kind of the same way.
And based on your research, what's your opinion as far as like population growth? You feel like GMOs are necessary to accommodate that?
I think so. I've tried thinking about it without it too, just kind of imagine what it would be like. And when you look at just how much food we need with that growing population and seeing like seasonally how just supermarkets would look without it, I think there would be less in the markets. And then also with animals, I didn't mention this before, but a lot of the feed that those animals are getting are through GMO products that are put into their feed. So it also improves the animals that we're consuming as well. So I think you would see a drastic change in just supermarket products if we were to get rid of it. So I'm for it in that regard.
Okay, so do you think there are any GMOs that maybe have gone too far? So for instance, wheat has about 40 times the amount of gluten in America as it does in several European countries, which may lead to a false sense of gluten intolerance.
Yes, that was a perfect example from what I'd seen too, is that, so my grandmother, for example, like she developed celiac later, which was, she can't have gluten at all. So back in her early days, those gluten levels were lower. And as, the years went on, she didn't develop it until I think the 90s or the early 2000s, but it eventually developed from just those gluten levels being higher. So I definitely think it can develop certain health risks just based on just the kind of GMO that it is. So I definitely.
Yeah, so this question, this is one that really stuck with me. And it's really a lot more of a theoretical question.
Yep.
Because it seems like a lot of the issues surrounding GMOs have to do with like practical matters, like sustainability, like you're saying, like maybe helping to feed a larger population potentially. So I'm not a philosopher, but I come from a department of history and philosophy. We have philosophy people and they think outside the box a little bit. And one thing that this, not having much any knowledge about GMOs, I'm coming really from a basic place. And the first part of that, genetically modified. And for someone from a background in philosophy, people who are like trained and they think in terms of ethics, I can see why that would be a really concerning term.
Yeah.
And can you speak to, I mean, I have some thoughts, I wonder what your thoughts are, why that might be concerning.
So every GMO, whenever they add, they alter the genetics, they hear the words genetically modified and it sounds pretty intimidating. But there's also there's some people that I've heard that have told me that they think it's not the same as whenever you go to a market and there's meats and, they've got like antibiotics added, or they've got like these different kind of just things that they think things added make it just absolutely awful for you. But there's a difference between adding things that could, like antibiotics or anything that could alter the quality or anything in the meat itself to your body. Of course, this is stuff that it takes into its genetics and they use it to just kind of spotlight benefits, and anything that is GMO related has to go through FDA in order for it to even hit the market. So there's definitely a different side by just affecting the genetics rather than just like adding supplements and stuff to it.
To Kendall's point earlier, there are things that we've done to alter wheat, for example, for years, just like we did with corn, without actually doing it and directly modifying the genetic structure. So I think the changes in gluten are not because they're GM wheat. There is no GM wheat grown commercially at this point, but they've done a lot of things to shift the way that we grow it, picking certain things and that has led to higher levels. So I don't think people know the difference between all of those different technological processes we've gone through and for productivity. That's kind of what we want to point out with this. Yeah.
I think some of these issues seem like they definitely relate to sustainability, right?
Oh, yes.
And again, I'm not like pro or anti-GM. I don't know enough about it. I've really enjoyed learning this, but I can see why there are people who are concerned because sustainability is such a big issue worldwide with concerns about the growing population. And again, I think about like the possible ethical implications. If people completely accepted the idea that anything that's going to create more sustainability, especially for the world population, and that becomes our end goal, then I can see how it could possibly open up the Pandora's box, right? Because in Canada already, they're having much more. It's much easier, for instance, to have euthanasia, right, for people who want to have state-assisted suicide, for example. Canada's supporting that much more, and one of the factors is they can make the case of, well, we already have this growing population, and so anything that might help limit the problems with a low food supply, we can do that. And so I'm just throwing that out there, that might be something that they find in future researchers to think about the ethical implication.
Right. And I think also whenever they're building like the sustainability, it's not just like life on the shelf. It's a lot of like with transportation. Like I'm sure there's other countries that may not have the amount of food supply that other countries do. So being able to import and export those products and be able for them to survive that long and still be quality when they get to them is probably just a good advantage that they gave to that product. Any more questions? All right.